The seamstress's invitation arrived on cream-colored paper, so thick she almost mistaken it for fabric. Elena Emory held the envelope up to the lamp in her tiny workshop, squinting at the embossed seal pressed into midnight blue wax, a raven clutching a crown in its talons. She knew that symbol from the newspapers, from whispered conversations in the marketplace, from the Gothic towers that rose beyond the river where mortals rarely ventured after dark. The House of Ravencrest, the Vampire King's house. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. The invitation unfolded in her hands, written in silver ink that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. She was cordially invited to attend the centennial gala celebrating 100 years of peace between the mortal city and the vampire courts. Dress would be formal. The date was 3 weeks away. Elena set the invitation down on her work table, between a half-finished bodice for Mrs. Henderson and the pile of mending she took in to pay rent. She stared at it for a long moment, then laughed a short, bitter sound that echoed off the bare walls of her workshop. She didn't own a nice dress, not one suitable for a vampire gala, not even one suitable for a decent mortal wedding. Everything she owned was practical, serviceable, threadbare, in places she'd carefully patched. Her nicest outfit was a gray cotton dress she wore to church on Sundays, and even that had been turned twice at the hem where the fabric had worn thin. The invitation sat on her table for 3 days before she received a second message. This one came with a knock on her door just after sunset. Elena wiped her hands on her apron and opened it to find a young woman with paper-white skin and hair like spun silver standing on her doorstep. A vampire. Elena's breath caught. "Miss Emory?" The vampire's voice was soft, musical. "I am Isadora, assistant to King Zarek Ravencrest. His Majesty noticed you have not yet responded to your invitation." Elena's mouth went dry. "I didn't realize a response was required." "It is not mandatory," Isadora said carefully. "But His Majesty specifically requested your presence. He remembers the dress you made for Lady Catherine's wedding last spring. He called it a work of art." Heat crept up Elena's neck. She'd spent 3 months on that commission, every spare hour devoted to cream silk and delicate embroidery. It had been the finest thing she'd ever created, and she'd been paid well for it. That money had gone immediately to overdue rent and her mother's medicine. "Please convey my gratitude to His Majesty," Elena said quietly, "but I must respectfully decline." Isadora tilted her head, genuinely confused. "May I ask why?" The words stuck in Elena's throat. How could she explain to this creature dressed in velvet and pearls that she couldn't afford to be seen at a vampire court, that her poverty would shame her, mark her as lesser, turn her into a spectacle, that she would rather stay home than face the pitying stares, or worse, the contempt? "Personal reasons," Elena managed. Isadora studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I will inform His Majesty. Good evening, Miss Emory." Elena closed the door and leaned against it, heart pounding. She thought that would be the end of it. She was wrong. 2 days later, King Zarek Ravencrest himself appeared in her workshop. Elena was bent over her sewing table, carefully stitching a torn seam in a gentleman's waistcoat when the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. She looked up and froze. The Vampire King stood in her doorway, tall and impossibly regal in a long black coat that probably cost more than her entire building. His skin was pale as moonlight, his hair the color of fresh snow, hanging straight to his shoulders. His eyes were dark, fathomless, ancient beyond measure. "Miss Emory," he said, and his voice was deep, resonant, the kind of voice that commanded armies. "I hope I am not interrupting." Elena shot to her feet so quickly her chair fell backward. "Your Majesty, I'm sorry, I wasn't expecting—" She stopped, pressed her lips together, forced herself to breathe. "May I help you?" Zarek stepped fully into the workshop, and the small space seemed to shrink around his presence. He moved with fluid grace, examining the bolts of fabric stacked against the wall, the dresses hanging on hooks, the organized chaos of her profession. His gaze was thoughtful, appreciative. "Isadora tells me you declined the invitation to the gala," he said without preamble. Elena's hands twisted in her apron. "Yes, Your Majesty." "May I ask why?" There it was again. That simple question she couldn't answer honestly without exposing herself completely. Elena stared at the floor, at his expensive leather boots that probably cost what she earned in 6 months. "I don't own a nice dress," she whispered. The silence stretched out. Elena wanted to sink through the floorboards and disappear. Of all the humiliating moments in her life, and there had been many, this ranked among the worst. Admitting her poverty to the king of vampires in her shabby workshop that smelled of fabric dust and cheap lamp oil. "Look at me," Zarek said softly. It wasn't a command exactly, but Elena found herself obeying anyway. She lifted her eyes to meet his. He was closer now, standing just on the other side of her work table, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. "You create beauty every day," he said. "I have seen your work. The dress you made for Lady Catherine was extraordinary, the finest craftsmanship I have witnessed in decades. You have been invited to the gala because you are an artist, Miss Emory, not because of what you wear." "That's kind of you to say, but—" "I do not say kind things," Zarek interrupted, and there was a hint of something in his voice, not quite amusement, but close. "I say true things. There is a difference." Elena swallowed hard. "The gala will be full of nobles and wealthy merchants, vampires in their finest. Everyone will be dressed beautifully. I would look like—" She stopped herself. "Like what?" "Like I don't belong there." Zarek was quiet for a moment, watching her with those ancient, unreadable eyes. Then he did something that shocked her to her core. He smiled. It was a small smile, barely a curve of his lips, but it transformed his severe face into something almost warm. "Miss Emory," he said, "your laughter is the finest thing anyone could wear to my gala. If you choose to come dressed in exactly what you have on right now, you would still outshine half my court." Elena stared at him. He said it with such gravity, such absolute certainty that she almost believed him. Almost. "I don't understand," she said. "My court is full of people who drape themselves in jewels and silks and call it substance," Zarek said quietly. "They wear their wealth like armor and measure worth in gold. But I have lived for 300 years, Miss Emory, and I have learned that the finest things in this world cannot be purchased. Joy, honesty, the satisfaction of creating something beautiful with your own hands." He paused. "Your laughter, which I heard once at Lady Catherine's wedding when you didn't know anyone was listening. That is finer than any gown." Elena felt something crack open in her chest. This ancient vampire king, this powerful immortal being, stood in her shabby workshop and told her she was enough, just as she was. "Why does it matter if I attend?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Zarek's expression shifted, became more guarded. "I'm required to present a consort at the gala, a partner of sorts. There's a rival House Moreau that challenges my position. They argue that I'm unfit to lead because I value mortals too highly, because I have refused to take a vampire bride, because I—" He stopped himself, jaw tightening. "If I appear without a consort, they gain leverage. They will push for changes to the peace accords, changes that would harm mortals in this city." Understanding dawned slowly. "You need me there for political reasons." "I need someone there who represents what I actually value," Zarek corrected. "Not vampire nobility or old bloodlines or ancient wealth. Someone whose presence would make a statement about what truly matters." He met her eyes steadily. Someone genuine. Elena's mind raced. This wasn't a fairy tale. This was politics, vampire court intrigue, power games she barely understood. But the stakes were suddenly clear. If the rival house won, if they undermined the king's position, mortals would suffer. "I still don't have anything to wear," she said quietly. "Then I will have something made for you," Zarek replied immediately. "No." The word came out more sharply than she intended. Elena took a breath, softened her tone. "No, thank you, Your Majesty. If I attend your gala, I attend on my own terms, not dressed up like a doll to play a part." Something flickered in Zarek's eyes. Respect, perhaps, or surprise. "What are your terms, Miss Emory?" Elena looked around her workshop, at the fabric she'd collected over years, at the skills she'd honed since childhood when her mother first taught her to sew. "I'll make my own dress. It won't be perfect. I don't have time or funds for silk or anything grand, but it will be mine. And I won't wear any jewels or finery you try to give me. I'll go as myself, or not at all." For a long moment, Zarek simply looked at her. Then that small, rare smile returned. "Those terms are acceptable. The gala is 3 weeks from Saturday. May I send a carriage for you?" "You may," Elena said, and felt the world tilt beneath her feet. After the king left, Elena stood alone in her workshop for a long time, staring at the door he'd closed so carefully behind him. Then she turned to her fabric stores and began to plan. She had 3 weeks to create a dress from scraps and hope, to prepare herself for a world she'd only glimpsed from the outside. 3 weeks before she walked into the vampire court on the arm of a king who thought her laughter was the finest thing she could wear. Elena pulled out her best needles and got to work. The next 2 weeks blurred together in a haze of thread and candlelight. Elena worked during every spare moment between her paying commissions and the mending that kept her fed. She pulled apart an old curtain of deep blue velvet she'd been saving for years, remnants of a estate sale where she'd splurged on damaged goods. The fabric had water stains along one edge, moth holes in places, but there was enough good material if she was careful. She drafted patterns on newspaper, cutting and recutting until the pieces would work. The design was simple. She couldn't afford elaborate beading or expensive lace, but elegant. A fitted bodice with a modest neckline, long sleeves to hide where the fabric was thinnest, a flowing skirt that would move beautifully when she walked. She had some cream-colored thread she'd been hoarding, and she used it to embroider delicate vines along the neckline and cuffs, working by lamplight until her eyes burned and her fingers cramped. It wasn't the kind of dress she would have made for Lady Catherine. It wasn't grand or impressive, but it was honest, and it was hers. And that mattered. Zarek came to her workshop twice more before the gala. The first time, he brought a velvet box containing a diamond necklace that probably cost more than her building. "No," Elena said before he could even open it. "You haven't seen it yet." "I don't need to. I told you my terms." Zarek set the box on her work table, unopened. "I'm not trying to buy you, Miss Emory. I simply thought you might—" "I know what you thought," Elena interrupted gently. She was getting braver around him, she realized, less intimidated by his presence. "But I meant what I said. If I'm going to make a statement, it needs to be genuine. I can't represent the value of honest work if I'm draped in jewels I didn't earn." Zarek studied her for a long moment, then picked up the box and tucked it back into his coat. "As you wish. Though, for the record, you have earned far more than you know." His second visit came 3 days before the gala. Elena was putting the final touches on the dress, checking seams and making small adjustments, when he appeared in her doorway just after sunset. "Miss Emory," he said, and she could hear the tension in his voice. Elena set down her needle. "What's wrong?" "House Moreau has been spreading rumors. They claim I'm bringing a mortal to the gala as a pet, a curiosity, proof that I have gone soft." His jaw was tight, anger simmering beneath his controlled exterior. "They are trying to humiliate you before you even arrive." Something cold settled in Elena's stomach. "Maybe I shouldn't come." "No." The word was sharp, immediate. Zarek crossed the room in 2 strides, stopping just short of touching her. "If you withdraw now, they win. They prove that mortals can be intimidated, that we should return to the old ways where humans were considered lesser. I will not allow that." Elena looked up at him. He was close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the tension in his shoulders beneath his expensive coat. He cared about this deeply, she realized, not just politically, but personally. "Tell me about House Moreau," she said quietly. Zarek's expression darkened. "They are old blood, traditional. They believe vampires should rule absolutely, that mortals exist to serve us. Lady Vivienne Moreau leads the house. Now she has been positioning herself as an alternative to my leadership for decades. She despises the peace accords, the equal standing I have granted mortals in trade and law. If she gains enough support, she can call for a vote of no confidence, force me to step down. And then she would change the accords. She would dismantle them entirely." Zarek's voice was hard. "Mortals would return to being second-class citizens in their own city, perhaps worse." Elena absorbed this, weighing it against her own fears. "Why do you care so much? About mortals, I mean. Most vampires don't." Zarek was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she had ever heard it. "I was not always king. Once, a very long time ago, I was simply a soldier in an endless war. I have seen what happens when the powerful view others as lesser. I have participated in atrocities that still haunt me." He met her eyes. "When I took the throne, I vowed never to enable that kind of cruelty again. The peace accords are not politics to me, Miss Emory. They are atonement. Elena's breath caught. In that moment, she saw past the regal exterior, past the ancient vampire king, to the man beneath. Someone carrying centuries of guilt, trying to build something better. I'll be there, she said firmly, and I'll hold my head high no matter what they say. Something in Zarek's expression softened. Thank you, he said quietly. Then, even more quietly, Elena. It was the first time he'd used her given name. It sent a shiver down her spine that had nothing to do with cold. The night of the gala arrived too quickly and not fast enough. Elena dressed carefully in her workshop, braiding her dark hair into a crown around her head, pinning it with the few plain hairpins she owned. The blue velvet dress fit perfectly, she'd made sure of that, and the cream embroidery caught the lamplight beautifully. She looked at herself in her tiny, clouded mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Not grand, not wealthy, but dignified. Honest. The carriage arrived precisely at sunset. It was elegant but not ostentatious, drawn by 2 black horses with a vampire driver who helped her inside without comment. The interior was lined with soft velvet, and there was a small oil lamp that cast warm light across the space. Zarek was already inside, waiting. Elena's heart jumped when she saw him. He wore formal attire, a black coat with silver embroidery, a white shirt, black trousers that emphasized his tall, lean frame. His white hair was pulled back, revealing the sharp planes of his face. He looked every inch a king. Elena, he said, and his eyes traveled over her carefully, taking in every detail of her appearance. You look beautiful. The dress is imperfect, Elena said automatically. If you look closely at the left sleeve, there's a place where I had to patch. It is perfect, Zarek interrupted quietly, because you made it yourself, because it is real. He paused. Because you are wearing it. Elena settled into the seat across from him, heart racing. The carriage began to move, rolling smoothly through the streets toward the river, toward the vampire district, toward a world she'd never truly entered. Are you nervous? Zarek asked. Terrified, Elena admitted. Good. That means you understand the stakes. He leaned forward slightly. I need you to understand something, Elena. The moment we enter that ballroom, you will be judged. They will look for any weakness, any reason to dismiss you. House Moreau will try to humiliate you publicly. I know. And I will not be able to protect you from all of it, Zarek continued, and there was real regret in his voice. If I intervene too obviously, I will appear weak, desperate. I must maintain certain appearances. Elena met his eyes steadily. I'm not asking you to protect me. I'm asking you to let me stand beside you as an equal. That's the statement we're making, isn't it? That mortals have worth beyond what we can provide to vampires. Zarek stared at her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. You are remarkable, he said softly. I hope you know that. Heat crept up Elena's neck. Before she could respond, the carriage slowed, then stopped. They had arrived. The Vampire Court's gala was held in an underground ballroom beneath the Ravencrest mansion, a vast space of Gothic arches and crystal chandeliers that cast rainbow light across marble floors. Elena descended the grand staircase on Zarek's arm, acutely aware of every eye turning toward them. The other guests were exactly as stunning as she'd feared. Vampire nobility in silk and diamonds, their pale skin and white hair making them look like beautiful ghosts. Wealthy mortal merchants in their finest, trying desperately to fit in. Everyone glittering, everyone polished, everyone so much more magnificent than Elena could ever hope to be. She felt their stares like physical weight, heard the whispers start immediately. Is that the seamstress? She's wearing velvet, how quaint. Look at that embroidery, did she do it herself? Poor thing, she has no idea how out of place she looks. Elena's fingers tightened on Zarek's arm. He covered her hand with his own, just for a moment, a brief gesture of solidarity. Then, they reached the bottom of the stairs and entered the ballroom proper. Lady Vivienne Moreau appeared within minutes. She was breathtaking in the way vampires often were, pale skin, silver white hair piled high, dressed in crimson silk that probably cost more than Elena would earn in her lifetime. Her smile was sharp as a blade. Your Majesty, she said, voice like honey over poison, How wonderful to see you, and you've brought a guest. Her gaze slid to Elena, dismissive and cold. How charming. Is this your little mortal? This is Miss Elena Emory, Zarek said coolly, a master seamstress and artist. Elena, may I present Lady Vivienne Moreau? Vivienne's smile didn't waver. A seamstress, how perfectly appropriate. Tell me, dear, did you make that dress yourself? It's very rustic. Elena forced herself to smile. I did, yes. Thank you for noticing. Oh, we all noticed, Vivienne said, and there was no mistaking the venom now. It's difficult not to notice when someone arrives at a centennial gala looking like they've just come from the workhouse, though I suppose His Majesty finds that sort of thing endearing. He has always had peculiar taste. Zarek went very still beside her. When he spoke, his voice could have frozen fire. Careful, Vivienne. I'm simply making conversation, Vivienne replied innocently. Surely Miss Emory understands that we all must dress appropriately for our station. It would be cruel to let her believe she fits in here when she so obviously does not. Other vampires were gathering now, drawn by the scent of conflict. Elena could feel their curiosity, their judgment, pressing in from all sides. This was the humiliation Zarek had warned her about. This was the test. Elena took a breath, lifted her chin, and met Vivienne's eyes directly. You're right, Lady Moreau. I don't fit in here. I'm not wealthy, I don't wear diamonds, and my dress was made from salvaged fabric I bought at a damaged goods sale. But I stand here tonight because His Majesty believes that worth isn't measured in gold or silk. He believes in the value of honest work, of creation, of substance over spectacle. If that makes me inappropriate for your court, then perhaps the problem isn't with me. Silence fell across the immediate area. Several vampires stared at Elena with something between shock and respect. Vivienne's smile finally faltered. How delightfully naive, she said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. You actually believe that, don't you? Poor dear. I believe, Zarek said quietly, that Miss Emory has more genuine worth in one finger than most of this court possesses in total. And yes, Vivienne, that includes you. The silence deepened. Elena could feel the political weight of that statement, the line Zarek had just drawn. Vivienne's expression went cold and hard. We shall see what the court believes, she said softly. Enjoy your evening, Your Majesty. Miss Emory. She turned and swept away, her crimson dress trailing behind her like blood. Zarek let out a slow breath. That could have gone better. Could it have gone worse? Elena asked. Much worse. She could have challenged me directly. Zarek glanced down at her. You handled that well. Better than most would have. Elena wasn't sure about that, but she appreciated the sentiment. As the evening progressed, she began to notice a divide forming in the ballroom. Some guests, mostly vampires aligned with House Moreau, avoided her and Zarek entirely, whispering among themselves, shooting disapproving looks. But others approached with genuine curiosity, asking about her work, complimenting the embroidery on her dress, treating her with respect. An older vampire gentleman named Lord Cedric asked detailed questions about her techniques. A mortal merchant's wife admired the vine pattern along her neckline and asked if Elena took commissions. Slowly, carefully, Elena began to relax. Then Zarek did something unexpected. He laughed. It happened during a conversation with Lord Cedric and another vampire, Lady Isolde, who was recounting a ridiculous story about a mishap at the previous century's gala. The story wasn't particularly funny, but Elena smiled at the absurdity of it. Zarek glanced at her, saw her expression, and suddenly laughed a genuine open sound that transformed his severe face completely. Several nearby conversations stopped. People turned to stare. Elena realized with a start that most of these people had probably never heard their king laugh. He was always so controlled, so careful, so perfectly regal. But now he was laughing, looking at Elena with warmth in his ancient eyes, and the moment felt impossibly intimate despite the crowd around them. Your Majesty, Lady Isolde said carefully, I don't believe I've ever seen you so relaxed. Miss Emory has that effect, Zarek said simply, and there was no pretense in his voice, just honesty. Elena felt heat flood her cheeks. Across the ballroom, she caught sight of Vivienne watching them with an expression of pure fury. The evening continued. There was dancing formal, elaborate waltzes that Elena had never learned. She stood on the sidelines, watching the glittering couples spin across the marble floor, and tried not to feel out of place. "Would you like to dance?" Zarek appeared at her elbow, offering his hand. "I don't know how," Elena admitted. "Not like this." "I'll teach you." It wasn't a request. Zarek led her onto the floor as a new waltz began, placed one hand at her waist and took her hand in his other. "Follow my lead. Don't think too hard about it." Elena stumbled through the first few steps, acutely aware of people watching, judging. But Zarek was patient, guiding her carefully, and gradually she found the rhythm. They moved together across the floor, not gracefully exactly, but honestly, genuinely. "You're doing well," Zarek murmured. "I'm stepping on your feet. I've survived worse." There was a hint of amusement in his voice. "Elena, there's something I need to tell you. After tonight, regardless of how this ends with House Moreau, I want you to know that inviting you was not merely political strategy." Elena's heart skipped. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I have thought of little else but you since the day I saw you at Lady Catherine's wedding," Zarek said quietly. "I heard you laugh while adjusting the bride's train, just a small sound of satisfaction when you got the draping right. It was the most genuine expression of joy I'd witnessed in decades. I found myself wanting to hear it again." Elena's breath caught. "Your Majesty." "Zarek," he corrected softly. "When we are together like this, please call me Zarek." "Zarek," Elena whispered, testing the name. "I don't understand. You're a king. You've lived for centuries. Why would you care about a seamstress's laughter?" "Because it reminded me what joy sounds like," Zarek said simply. "Because in 300 years, I have forgotten how to find happiness in small moments. Because you create beauty not for status or wealth, but because it satisfies something in your soul. And because when I look at you, I see what I have been fighting for all these years, someone genuine and good and worth protecting." The music swelled around them. Elena felt like she was floating, untethered from reality. This couldn't be real. Ancient vampire kings didn't fall for poor seamstresses. This was politics, strategy, necessity. Except the way Zarek was looking at her suggested otherwise. "I don't know what to say," Elena admitted. "You don't have to say anything," Zarek replied. "I simply needed you to know. Before—" He stopped abruptly, gaze shifting to something over her shoulder. His expression hardened. "We have a problem." Elena turned to follow his gaze. Vivian was standing near the center of the ballroom, surrounded by several other vampires from House Moreau. She was holding something in her hand, a piece of paper, and smiling triumphantly. "Ladies and gentlemen," Vivian's voice rang out across the ballroom. The music stopped. Every conversation died. "I apologize for the interruption, but I have just received some fascinating information about our king's honored guest." Elena's stomach dropped. "It seems Miss Emory is not quite the innocent artist His Majesty has presented her as," Vivian continued, unfolding the paper with deliberate slowness. "I have here a document showing that Miss Emory is 3 months behind on her rent, has outstanding debts with several merchants, and was recently denied a loan by the Mortal Commerce Bank due to, how did they put it? Insufficient reliability and questionable financial stability." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. Every eye in the ballroom was on her now, judging, calculating, dismissing. "In other words," Vivian said sweetly, "our king has chosen a consort who cannot even manage her own affairs, a woman drowning in debt, desperately clinging to any opportunity to improve her station. One might wonder if her presence here tonight is less about His Majesty's peculiar values and more about her own financial desperation." The humiliation crashed over Elena like a wave. It was true, all of it was true. She was behind on rent because her mother's medicine was expensive. She had debts because sometimes she had to choose between eating and buying fabric for commissions. The bank had denied her loan because she had no collateral, no security, nothing but her skills and her hope. And now everyone knew it. Everyone knew she was poor, desperate, unreliable. "That's enough, Vivian." Zarek's voice cut through the whispers like a blade. "Is it?" Vivian's smile widened. "I'm simply providing context, Your Majesty. The court deserves to know who you've chosen to represent your values. A woman who can't even pay her own bills, wearing a dress made from damaged goods, pretending to be something she's not." Elena wanted to run, wanted to disappear, wanted to be anywhere but here, standing in the center of this glittering ballroom while vampires and mortals alike stared at her with pity or contempt or satisfaction. Then Zarek did something that shocked everyone in attendance. He laughed. Not a small chuckle or polite amusement, a real, full laugh that echoed off the vaulted ceiling. He turned to Elena, still smiling, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Did you know that I once lost an entire castle in a card game? This was about 200 years ago. I was young, arrogant, terrible at cards, lost the castle, the lands, everything. Had to live in a modest townhouse for 3 years while I rebuilt my fortune." Elena stared at him. The ballroom was silent. "And Lord Cedric over there," Zarek continued, gesturing to the older vampire who'd asked about Elena's work, "once invested his entire family fortune in a shipping venture that sank quite literally on its maiden voyage. He was eating stale bread for a decade. Lord Cedric had the grace to look embarrassed. It was a foolish investment, he admitted. Lady Isolde," Zarek went on, "commissioned a portrait that was so unflattering she tried to have the artist killed. The scandal nearly ruined her." "It was truly awful," Isolde agreed weakly. Zarek turned back to Vivian, his smile sharp now. "Everyone in this room has made mistakes, Vivian. Everyone has struggled. The difference is that Miss Emory doesn't hide her struggles behind inherited wealth and pretense. She works. She creates. She survives through skill and determination. Her debts exist because she chooses to care for her ailing mother instead of abandoning her. She was denied a loan because banks measure worth in collateral rather than character. And yes, her dress is made from damaged fabric, which makes it all the more impressive that it's more beautiful than half the gowns in this room." He stepped closer to Elena, took her hand, and raised it so everyone could see. "Miss Emory represents exactly what I value: resilience, honesty, the courage to create beauty even when life is difficult. If you find that shameful, Vivian, then you have proven precisely why your house will never lead this court." Then Zarek did something even more shocking, He pulled Elena close and laughed with her genuinely, openly, choosing joy over dignity in front of the entire assembled court. Except Elena wasn't laughing. She was trembling, fighting tears, overwhelmed by the public defense and the intimacy of his touch. "Laugh with me," Zarek murmured in her ear. "Show them that their judgment means nothing. Show them you are stronger than their contempt." Elena drew a shaky breath. Then she thought about everything she'd survived: her father's death, her mother's illness, years of scraping by, endless nights working until her fingers bled. She thought about the dress she'd made from salvaged velvet, the embroidery she'd stitched by lamplight, the courage it had taken to walk into this ballroom knowing she would be judged. And she laughed, quiet at first, then stronger. Real laughter, born from defiance and relief and the absurdity of standing in a vampire court while a 300-year-old king defended her honor. Zarek smiled down at her, and there was such warmth in his eyes that Elena's breath caught. For a moment, the ballroom and all its glittering occupants faded away. There was only Zarek, holding her hand, choosing her over his own dignity. The moment broke when someone started clapping. Lord Cedric, looking thoroughly amused. Then Lady Isolde joined in. Then others, slowly at first, then building to genuine applause. Vivian stood alone in the center of the floor, her triumph turned to ash, her expression furious. "This is absurd," she said coldly. "You're all applauding his mockery of our traditions, his elevation of a poverty-stricken mortal over vampire nobility." "I'm applauding his honesty," Lord Cedric said calmly, "and his courage. Qualities that seem to be in short supply in your house, Vivian." Vivian's eyes flashed dangerously. "You will regret this," she said quietly, looking directly at Zarek. "All of you will regret this." She turned and swept from the ballroom, several of her supporters following. But not all of them. Elena noticed a few vampires from House Moreau remain behind, watching Vivian's exit with thoughtful expressions. The gala continued, but the atmosphere had shifted. People approached Elena differently now, not with pity or contempt, but with genuine curiosity and, in some cases, respect. The merchant's wife, who'd admired her embroidery earlier, commissioned a dress on the spot. A young vampire asked detailed questions about her techniques. Even some of the nobles who'd whispered earlier offered polite compliments. But Elena's mind was elsewhere. She couldn't stop thinking about what Zarek had done, how he'd defended her not with power or threats, but with vulnerability, by exposing his own past mistakes, by choosing to laugh with her in front of everyone, sacrificing his careful, regal image to protect her. Why would he do that? Why would he risk so much for a seamstress he barely knew? As if sensing her thoughts, Zarek appeared at her side. "Walk with me," he said quietly. "There's something I need to show you." He led her out of the ballroom, through corridors of dark wood and oil paintings, down a spiral staircase into what appeared to be a private study. The walls were lined with books and a fire burned in a massive stone fireplace. It was warm, intimate, so different from the cold grandeur of the ballroom. "This is my private sanctuary," Zarek said, closing the door behind them. "Very few people are allowed here." Elena looked around, taking in the comfortable furniture, the books stacked on every surface, the maps and charts covering one wall. It felt lived in, personal, real. "Why did you defend me like that?" Elena asked quietly. "You could have distanced yourself, protected your position. Instead, you—" "I told you," Zarek interrupted gently. "This isn't just politics to me, Elena. You aren't just a convenient choice. I meant what I said earlier. I have thought of little else but you for months." "But why?" Elena's voice cracked. "I don't understand. You're a king. You could have anyone." Zarek was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was soft. "Do you know what it's like to live for 300 years, Elena? To watch everyone you care about age and die while you remain unchanged? To become so careful, so controlled, that you forget what it feels like to simply experience joy?" Elena shook her head. "I have been king for 200 years, Zarek continued. "In that time, I have made difficult decisions, fought wars, negotiated treaties, maintained peace. I have been what my people needed me to be, but I have also been alone, profoundly, achingly alone, because I could not let myself care too deeply for any one mortal, knowing I would lose them, and I could not bring myself to care for vampire nobility, who only saw my crown and not the person beneath." He turned to face her. "Then I heard you laugh at that wedding. Such a small thing, a seamstress satisfied with her own work. But it was real, Elena. Genuine. The first genuine moment of joy I'd witnessed in longer than I could remember. And I found myself wanting more of that, needing it." Elena's heart was pounding. "Zarek." "I know the difficulties," he continued quietly. "I know you are mortal and I am not. I know that any relationship between us would be complicated, perhaps impossible. But I also know that I have not felt this alive, this present, in centuries, and it terrifies me as much as it compels me." Elena crossed the space between them slowly. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the cool smoothness of his skin beneath her fingers. He went very still, watching her with those ancient, vulnerable eyes. "I'm afraid too," Elena whispered. "I'm afraid of this world I don't understand, of people like Vivian who want to destroy me, of caring for someone who will outlive me by centuries. But tonight, when you laughed with me in front of everyone, I felt something I haven't felt in years. Hope. Like maybe I could be more than just a struggling seamstress. Like maybe I could belong somewhere." Zarek covered her hand with his own, holding it against his face. "You belong exactly where you are," he said fiercely. "You always have. The world is simply too blind to see it." They stood like that for a long moment, the firelight dancing across their faces, the sounds of the gala distant and muffled through the heavy door. Then Elena rose on her toes and kissed him. It was soft, tentative, barely a brush of lips, but Zarek made a sound low in his throat and pulled her closer, deepening the kiss, pouring 300 years of loneliness and longing into the connection. Elena melted against him, her hands sliding up to tangle in his white hair, her heart racing so fast she thought it might burst. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Zarek rested his forehead against hers. "Elena," he murmured, "I cannot promise you forever. I cannot promise this will be easy. But I can promise that I will value every moment we have, that I will protect you with everything I have, that I will—" A crash from somewhere above them cut him off, shouting, the sounds of conflict. Zarek's expression went hard. "Stay here," he ordered, and was gone before Elena could respond, moving with inhuman speed. Elena stood alone in the study for perhaps 30 seconds before her curiosity won out. She hurried after him, gathering her skirts, following the sounds of chaos back toward the ballroom. What she found made her blood run cold. The ballroom was in disarray. Several vampires from House Moreau, including Vivian, stood in aggressive positions, clearly having just attacked. Lord Cedric was on the ground, bleeding from a wound on his shoulder. Lady Isolde had her hands raised defensively. Other guests were backing away, frightened, and Zarek stood in the center of it all, facing Vivian with murder in his eyes. "You dare attack my guests," he said quietly, voice deadly calm. "In my own house, during a centennial celebration. I dare challenge a weak king who has betrayed everything we are," Vivian snarled. "You defend mortals, you mock vampire traditions, you choose a poverty-stricken human over your own kind. You are unfit to lead, Zarek Ravencrest, and I am claiming my right to formal challenge." The room went silent. Elena didn't fully understand vampire politics, but she understood enough to know this was serious. Deadly serious. "You want to challenge me for the throne?" Zarek asked softly. "I want to restore proper order," Vivian corrected. "Vampires should rule, Zarek. Mortals should serve. That is the natural way. Your precious peace accords have made us weak, dependent on human cooperation. It's time to return to strength." "By attacking guests under guest right?" Zarek gestured to Lord Cedric, still bleeding on the floor. "How is that strength, Vivian? It's cowardice disguised as tradition." "It's a statement," Vivian replied coldly. "One that many in this room agree with, even if they're too frightened to say so." Elena scanned the crowd and realized with sinking dread that Vivian might be right. Many vampires watched with neutral expressions, not defending Zarek, not intervening, waiting to see who would win before choosing a side. Then Elena noticed something else. Several of Vivian's supporters were positioning themselves near the ballroom exits, blocking escape routes. This wasn't just a challenge, this was a trap. Elena's mind raced. She had to do something. Zarek was powerful, but he couldn't fight an entire house alone. And if Vivian won, if she took the throne, the peace accords would die. Mortals would suffer. Without thinking, Elena strode forward into the center of the ballroom. "Lady Moreau," she called out loudly, "I have a question." Every eye turned to her. Zarek looked alarmed. "Elena, get back!" "If you believe mortals are so weak, so inferior," Elena continued, ignoring Zarek, addressing Vivian directly, "then why are you so threatened by me? I'm just a seamstress. I have no power, no wealth, no standing, yet you've spent this entire evening trying to humiliate me. Doesn't that suggest you're actually afraid of what I represent?" Vivian's lip curled. "I'm not afraid of you, child." "No?" Elena took another step forward. "Then why go through the trouble of digging up my financial records? Why the public attack? If I'm truly insignificant, why not just ignore me?" "Because you are a symptom of the disease," Vivian said coldly. "You represent everything wrong with Zarek's leadership, the elevation of the unworthy, the celebration of mediocrity, the—" "I heard something interesting tonight," Elena interrupted. She was making this up as she went, operating on pure instinct and desperation. "I heard that your house has been struggling financially, that several of your investments have failed, that you've been borrowing from other houses to maintain appearances. Is that true?" Vivian went very still. "Where did you hear that?" "It doesn't matter where I heard it." Elena's voice was steady despite her racing heart. "What matters is that you're doing exactly what you accused me of, desperately clinging to power to improve your station. The difference is, I'm honest about my struggles. You hide yours behind attacks on others." A murmur ran through the crowd. Several vampires exchanged glances. Elena could see uncertainty spreading, Vivian's support wavering. "You know nothing," Vivian snarled. "I know that real strength doesn't come from crushing those weaker than you," Elena replied. "It comes from lifting them up, from creating systems where everyone can thrive, not just the powerful. That's what Zarek has been trying to build, and that's what terrifies you. Because if mortals are given equal standing, you lose your advantage. You have to actually earn respect instead of demanding it." Vivian's hands clenched into fists. "You dare, I dare, because someone has to," Elena said firmly. "You talk about tradition and strength, but I've seen true strength tonight. It looks like a king who admits his mistakes publicly, like nobles who acknowledge their own failures, like people choosing honesty over pretense." She paused. "What I haven't seen is strength from you, Lady Moreau, just fear and cruelty dressed up as superiority." For a moment, Elena thought Vivian might actually attack her. The vampire's eyes flashed with rage, her body tensing. But then Lord Cedric, still bleeding but now standing, spoke up. "The girl is right," he said quietly. "Vivian, your house has been struggling for years. Everyone knows it, even if we're too polite to mention it. This challenge isn't about strength or tradition. It's about your own desperation." "I agree," Lady Isolde added. "And attacking guests under guest right is unforgivable, Vivian. You've violated the oldest laws we have." Other voices joined in, vampires who'd been silent before, now speaking up. The tide was turning, and Vivian could see it. Her supporters near the exits looked uncertain now, glancing between their lady and the growing opposition. Zarek moved to stand beside Elena, close enough that their shoulders touched. "Vivian," he said quietly, "you have two choices. Withdraw your challenge and your house maintains its current standing, or continue this path and face formal censure from the entire court. Choose wisely." Vivian looked around the ballroom, at the nobles who were no longer on her side, at her own supporters beginning to back away. Elena could see the moment she realized she'd lost. "This isn't over," Vivian said coldly. "You may have won tonight, Zarek, but the fundamental truth remains. You are weak. Your mortal pets will be your downfall." She turned and swept from the ballroom, her remaining supporters trailing behind. The tension in the room slowly dissolved, replaced by relieved chatter and the sounds of people tending to Lord Cedric's injuries. Zarek turned to Elena, and his expression was complex relief, pride, and something darker. "Fear. That was incredibly brave," he said quietly, "and incredibly foolish. She could have killed you." "But she didn't," Elena replied. Her hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. "And I think I might have saved your position. Did I? I wasn't entirely sure what I was doing." Zarek made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and Elena felt his entire body trembling. "You were magnificent," he murmured into her hair. "Terrifying and magnificent. Where did you hear about Vivian's financial troubles?" "I didn't," Elena admitted. "I guessed, based on how desperately she was attacking us, how much she needed this challenge to succeed. People who are secure don't fight that frantically." Zarek pulled back to look at her, something like wonder in his eyes. "You are extraordinary, Elena Emory. Do you know that?" Before Elena could respond, Lord Cedric approached, his shoulder now bandaged. "Miss Emory," he said formally, "you have done this court a great service tonight. Vivian has been poisoning the peace accords for years, but she had too much support to confront directly. You exposed her weakness and gave us the opening we needed." "I just said what needed to be said," Elena replied, embarrassed by the attention. "Precisely," Lord Cedric agreed. "Most people spend their entire lives not saying what needs to be said. You did it in front of the entire court, knowing it could cost you your life." He bowed slightly. "You have my respect, Miss Emory, and my gratitude." Other nobles approached with similar sentiments. The merchant's wife insisted on commissioning 3 dresses now instead of 1. Lady Isolde asked if Elena would consider opening a shop in the vampire district. Even some of the vampires who'd been neutral earlier offered compliments and apologies. Through it all, Zarek stayed close to Elena's side, his presence steady and protective. She could feel his pride, his relief, and underneath it all, his fear. Fear that she'd risked herself, fear that he could have lost her. The gala wound down slowly. Guests departed, still talking about the dramatic confrontation, about Miss Emory's courage, about the king's unusual choice of consort. By the time the last nobles left, dawn was approaching. Zarek had to retreat to his chambers soon, away from the coming sunlight. He walked Elena to the carriage personally, neither of them ready to say goodbye. "What happens now?" Elena asked quietly. "Now, Vivian, we'll retreat and plot," Zarek replied. "She won't challenge me again directly, she's lost too much support, but she'll work from the shadows, trying to undermine the peace accords through other means." "Can you stop her?" "With help, yes." Zarek took Elena's hands in his. "The court is shifting, Elena. What you did tonight standing up to her, defending the values I've been trying to establish, it gave others courage to do the same. Change is coming. Elena looked up at him, at this ancient vampire king who'd defended her, laughed with her, kissed her like she was precious beyond measure. What about us? She asked softly. What happens to us? Zarek was quiet for a long moment. I want to see you again, he said finally. Not for politics or strategy, just to see you, to talk with you, to hear you laugh. He paused. If that's something you want. Elena smiled. I want that very much. There will be complications, Zarek warned. The court will talk. Some will disapprove. And there's the matter of our different lifespans, our different worlds. I know, Elena said. We'll figure it out as we go, together. Zarek pulled her close and kissed her again, softer this time, full of promise and hope. When they parted, the sky was beginning to lighten at the edges. I have to go, Zarek said regretfully, but I'll send for you soon. We have much to discuss. Elena nodded, not trusting her voice. She climbed into the carriage and watched through the window as Zarek stood in the doorway of his mansion, watching her leave, outlined against the coming dawn. The next few weeks passed in a blur of change. True to his word, Zarek sent for Elena often. Sometimes they met in his private study, talking for hours about everything and nothing. Sometimes he visited her workshop, watching her work with genuine fascination. And sometimes they simply walked through the city together in the evenings, two people from different worlds learning to exist in the same space. The court talk was intense. Everyone had an opinion about the king's mortal seamstress, but Zarek had been right. The confrontation with Vivian had shifted something fundamental. More nobles were willing to openly support the peace accords now. More vampires and mortals were finding common ground, and Elena's business was thriving. The commissions came flooding in after the gala. Both mortals and vampires wanted dresses made by the woman who'd stood up to Lady Moreau. Elena had to hire 2 assistants just to keep up with demand. For the first time in her life, she wasn't struggling to pay rent or buy food. She could afford her mother's medicine without sacrificing everything else. But the real change was internal. Elena discovered that she liked this new version of herself, the one who spoke up, who stood her ground, who refused to be diminished. Zarek had helped her find that courage, but it had been there all along, waiting to be acknowledged. 3 months after the gala, Zarek arrived at her workshop with a proposal. The court needs restructuring, he said without preamble. Too much power concentrated in old vampire houses, too little representation for mortals. I want to create a council half vampire, half mortal to oversee the peace accords and ensure both communities have equal voice. Elena looked up from the dress she was hemming. That sounds like a political nightmare. It will be, Zarek agreed, which is why I need someone I trust to help design and implement it. Someone who understands both worlds, who can speak truth to power, who isn't afraid to fight for what's right. Understanding dawned. You want me on this council. I want you to help lead it, Zarek corrected, not as my consort or my political tool, but as yourself. Elena Emory, seamstress and artist, who understands what real people need because she's lived it. Elena set down her needle, considering. Vivian will fight this. Vivian is already fighting. She's been quietly meeting with other traditional houses, trying to build opposition. But she's weakened, and we have momentum. Zarek moved closer. I'm not asking you to put yourself in danger again, Elena. I'm asking if you're willing to be part of building something better, something lasting. Elena thought about the years she'd spent struggling, invisible, dismissed by a system that valued wealth over worth. She thought about other seamstresses, other workers, other mortals who deserved better. And she thought about the future she and Zarek could build together. Yes, she said simply. I'll do it. Relief flooded Zarek's face. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. Thank you, he murmured, for everything. For your courage, your wisdom, your laughter. For reminding me why any of this matters. They stood like that for a long moment, finding comfort in each other's presence. Then Elena pulled back slightly, looking up at him with a question in her eyes. Zarek, what is this between us? Really? He understood what she was asking. They'd been dancing around the question for months, growing closer but never defining what they were to each other. I love you, Zarek said quietly. I have loved you since I heard you laugh at that wedding, since you walked into my ballroom in a dress made from damaged velvet and refused to be ashamed, since you stood up to Vivian knowing she could destroy you. I love you, Elena, and I know that complicates everything. But I needed you to know. Elena's eyes filled with tears. I love you too, even though you're ancient and powerful and terrifying sometimes, even though we make no sense together, even though I still don't understand half of vampire politics. I love you. Zarek kissed her then, deep and passionate and full of promise, and for the first time in 300 years he allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, happiness was possible. The council was formed 6 months later. Half vampire nobles, half mortal representatives, all committed to maintaining and strengthening the peace accords. Elena served as co-chair alongside Lord Cedric, and together they began the slow work of reforming outdated laws and building bridges between communities. It wasn't easy. Vivian and her supporters pushed back at every opportunity, filing complaints, spreading rumors, trying to undermine the council's authority. But they were fighting a losing battle. Too many people, both vampire and mortal, had seen the benefits of true cooperation. The city was thriving in ways it hadn't for centuries. During this time, Elena's relationship with Zarek deepened. They were careful to maintain propriety in public. She was a council member, he was king, and they both knew the dangers of appearing too entangled. But in private, they were inseparable. Zarek taught her about vampire history and politics. Elena taught him to find joy in simple things, good food, beautiful fabric, the satisfaction of creating something with your own hands. They talked about the future, about the complications of loving someone whose lifespan was so different from your own. Zarek offered to turn her, to make her vampire so they could have centuries together. Elena refused, not out of fear, but because she wanted to live fully as herself. They agreed to cherish whatever time they had, whether that was decades or centuries, and to face the inevitable ending with courage when it came. A year after the gala, Elena opened her atelier in a building that straddled the border between the mortal and vampire districts. It was a large, beautiful space with excellent light and room for 6 seamstresses to work comfortably. She took commissions from everyone: mortal merchants, vampire nobles, working-class people who saved for months to afford one of her dresses. Every creation was made with the same care and attention, regardless of what the client could pay. The atelier became something more than just a business. It became a symbol of what the new city could be: a place where mortals and vampires worked side by side, where worth was measured in skill and character rather than species or wealth. Young people came to apprentice, learning the craft regardless of their background. And through it all, Zarek was there. Not as the distant vampire king, but as a partner, a supporter, a man who'd learned to find happiness in helping the woman he loved achieve her dreams. 2 years after the gala, on a quiet evening in early spring, Elena was working late in her atelier when Zarek arrived. She looked up from the embroidery she was perfecting a commissioned wedding dress for a vampire bride and smiled. "I didn't expect you tonight," she said. "I wanted to see you," Zarek replied simply. He'd become more open with his affection over time, less guarded, more willing to show vulnerability. "Is that a crime?" "A terrible one. I may have to report you to the council." Zarek moved behind her, looking over her shoulder at the delicate vine pattern she was stitching. "That's beautiful. Thank you." Elena set down her needle and turned to face him. "How was the meeting with the northern houses?" "Productive. They've agreed to adopt similar council structures in their territories." Zarek settled into the chair beside her work table, a chair that had become his over time, worn comfortable by his frequent presence. "Change is spreading, Elena. What we started here is becoming a movement." Elena felt a surge of pride. "That's wonderful." "It's more than wonderful. It's revolutionary." Zarek took her hand, running his thumb across her calloused fingers. "And it's because you had the courage to stand up at that gala and refuse to be diminished. Everything good that's happened since traces back to that moment." "I think you're giving me too much credit," Elena said softly. "I think I'm giving you exactly the right amount." Zarek pulled her closer, and Elena settled into his lap, resting her head against his shoulder. They sat like that often now, finding comfort in simple physical closeness. Do you remember what I said to you that night? Zarek asked quietly. Before the gala? You said many things. I said your laughter was the finest thing anyone could wear. Zarek's arms tightened around her. I meant it then, and I mean it even more now. Everything beautiful in my life traces back to you, Elena. Your joy, your courage, your refusal to accept the world as it is rather than as it should be. You have changed everything. Elena lifted her head to look at him. We changed everything. Together. Together, Zarek agreed and kissed her softly. They stayed like that as the evening deepened into night, two people from impossible circumstances who'd found each other anyway. Outside, the city hummed with life mortals and vampires coexisting, cooperating, building something new. Inside the atelier, surrounded by fabric and thread and the evidence of Elena's craft, a king and a seamstress held each other and planned the future. 5 years after the gala, the transformation was complete. The peace accords had been strengthened and expanded. The council system had spread to every major city in the region. Vivian had been forced into retirement after a scandal involving illegal dealings with rogue vampire factions. House Moreau still existed, but under new leadership that supported cooperation rather than conflict. Elena's atelier had become one of the most successful businesses in the city, known throughout the region for quality and fairness. She employed 20 seamstresses now, both mortal and vampire, and had opened a training program for young people who couldn't afford traditional apprenticeships. The girl who'd once struggled to pay rent now provided opportunities for others in similar situations, and her relationship with Zarek had settled into something deep and steady. They didn't hide their connection anymore. Everyone knew the king loved the seamstress and most approved. They were seen as a symbol of the new world, proof that different peoples could not just coexist, but thrive together. On a warm summer evening, 5 years to the day after the Centennial Gala, Zarek and Elena stood together in the main room of her atelier. The space was closed for the night, quiet except for their voices. I have something for you, Zarek said, pulling a small box from his coat pocket. Elena raised an eyebrow. You know I don't like expensive gifts. I know, which is why I made this myself. He opened the box to reveal a simple silver ring. It's not an engagement ring. I know you have thoughts about marriage and formality. It's simply a promise that for however long we have, I am yours and you are mine, that we build this future together, that your laughter will always be the finest thing I know. Elena's eyes filled with tears. She took the ring, examining the careful craftsmanship, and slipped it onto her finger. Then she pulled Zarek close and kissed him with everything she had. I love you, she whispered against his lips, my vampire king. I love you, Zarek replied, my brilliant seamstress. They stood together in the quiet atelier, surrounded by the evidence of all they'd built. Outside, the city they'd changed together moved through its evening rhythms, and inside, two people who'd found each other against all odds held tight to the happiness they'd created. Years would pass. The world would continue to change. There would be more challenges, more conflicts, more moments of doubt and struggle. But they would face it all together, a king who'd learned to laugh again, and a seamstress who'd discovered her own worth. Their love story would become legend, told and retold as proof that connection could bridge any divide, that courage came in many forms, and that sometimes the finest things in life couldn't be bought or inherited or demanded. Sometimes they simply had to be recognized, valued, and cherished. In a corner of the atelier, barely visible in the evening light, hung a blue velvet dress with cream embroidery. Elena had kept it all these years, a reminder of the night everything changed. The night she'd walked into a vampire gala in a dress made from damaged goods and discovered she was worth more than she'd ever imagined. The night a vampire king told her that her laughter was the finest thing anyone could wear, and meant it with all his ancient heart. And in the end, that had made all the difference. The seasons turned and years continued their steady march, but the foundation Elena and Zarek had built together only grew stronger. The atelier expanded twice more, becoming not just a business but a cultural institution. Mortals and vampires alike came not only to commission garments, but to attend the exhibitions Elena organized, showcasing the work of artisans from both communities. The building became a gathering place, a symbol of unity, a testament to what collaboration could achieve. Elena herself became something of a legend. The seamstress who'd stood up to vampire nobility, who'd helped reshape an entire society, who'd loved a king and been loved in return. Young women, mortal and vampire, both sought her out for advice, for inspiration, for proof that courage and integrity mattered more than birthright or wealth. But Elena never forgot where she came from. Once a month, she taught free workshops for struggling artisans, sharing techniques and business advice. She kept her prices accessible, ensuring that working-class people could still afford her services. And she never, ever looked down on someone for their circumstances, because she remembered too well what it felt like to be judged for poverty. Zarek continued to rule with wisdom and strength, but he was changed too. The cold, controlled king who'd existed before Elena was gone, replaced by someone more open, more willing to show vulnerability, more connected to both his vampire subjects and the mortals under his protection. He made a habit of walking through the city regularly, talking to people, understanding their concerns. And always, always he returned to the atelier at the end of the day, to the woman who'd taught him how to live again. They never did marry formally. Elena felt no need for ceremony, and Zarek respected that. But they were partners in every way that mattered, bound by choice and love rather than law or tradition. They built a life together that honored both their worlds, that created space for both immortal and mortal perspectives, that proved love didn't require sameness to thrive. 10 years after the gala, on a quiet autumn evening, Elena sat at her work table mending a hem, something she still did herself despite having employees who could handle it. The task was meditative, soothing, a connection to her roots. Zarek sat beside her in his worn chair, reading a book of mortal poetry he'd become fond of. "Do you ever regret it?" Elena asked suddenly. Zarek looked up. "Regret what?" "Choosing me, choosing this path. You could have married a vampire noble, secured your position easily, avoided all the complications." Zarek set down his book and took her hand, stilling her needle. "Elena, look at me." She did. His dark eyes were warm, certain, full of a love that had only deepened with time. Afhio. "I have lived for over 300 years, Zarek said quietly. "I have commanded armies, ruled kingdoms, accumulated wealth and power beyond measure, and none of it, not one moment of those centuries, brought me the joy I've found in these 10 years with you. You are not a complication, Elena. You are the answer to a question I'd been asking my entire existence, the question of why any of it mattered. What was worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth living for?" Elena's throat tightened with emotion. "So no," Zarek continued. "I do not regret choosing you. I regret only that I did not find you sooner, that I wasted so many years being alone when I could have been learning to laugh with you." Elena set aside her mending and kissed him, pouring a decade of love and gratitude into the connection. When they parted, both were smiling. "You know," Elena said softly, "when I received that invitation to the gala, I almost burned it. I was so ashamed of having nothing to wear, so certain I didn't belong in your world. And now? Now I know that I always belonged, not because of what I wore or what I owned, but because of who I was. You saw that before I did." Elena touched the silver ring she still wore on her finger. "You taught me my own worth, Zarek. That's the greatest gift you could have given me." "You taught me joy," Zarek replied. "I think we're even." They sat together in the quiet atelier as the evening deepened, surrounded by fabric and thread and the evidence of Elena's craft. Outside, the city they'd transformed together settled into night, and inside, two people who'd built something beautiful against all odds held tight to the love that had made it all possible. The story of the vampire king and the seamstress would be told for generations. How she'd walked into his court in a dress made from damaged goods, how he'd told her that her laughter was the finest thing anyone could wear. How together they'd transformed not just their own lives, but an entire society, proving that worth came from character rather than circumstance, that love could bridge any divide, and that sometimes the most revolutionary act was simply choosing to value what truly mattered. But for Elena and Zarek, it was never about the legend or the political impact or the social transformation. It was about the quiet moments, mending hems while he read poetry, walking through the city hand in hand, laughing together over dinner, planning projects and dreams and futures. It was about finding someone who saw you completely and loved you anyway. Someone who made you braver, kinder, more fully yourself. It was about a seamstress who discovered her own worth and a king who remembered how to be human. And in the end, that was the finest thing of all. The years continued to pass gently. Elena's hair began to show threads of silver, a stark contrast to Zarek's eternally white locks. Her hands, always skilled, developed the slight tremor of age, though she continued to sew with the same precision that had first caught the Vampire King's attention. Time marked her in ways it would never mark him, and they both knew this truth intimately. They spoke of it sometimes, in the deep hours of night when Elena couldn't sleep, and Zarek held her close. "I'm afraid," she admitted one night, when she was approaching 50 years old and feeling the weight of mortality. "Not of dying, but of leaving you alone again, of undoing all the joy we've built." Zarek held her tighter. "You could never undo it, Elena. You have taught me that joy is not dependent on forever. It is dependent on presence, on choosing to fully inhabit each moment we have. When you are gone," his voice caught, "I will grieve, deeply, but I will also remember. And I will continue the work we started together, because that is how I will honor what you've given me." "Promise me something," Elena whispered. "Anything. Promise me you'll keep laughing, even after I'm gone. Promise me you won't return to being that cold, distant king I met all those years ago." Zarek pressed his lips to her forehead. "I promise. You have changed me permanently, Elena Emory. There is no going back to who I was before you." Elena lived to be 73 years old. She worked almost until the end, her hands still creating beauty even as her body weakened. The atelier threw her a grand birthday celebration for her 70th, attended by hundreds of people whose lives she'd touched, mortals and vampires together, all gathered to honor the woman who'd helped reshape their world. Zarek was beside her through all of it, the gradual slowing, the increasing fatigue, the quiet acceptance that came with age. He cared for her with a tenderness that moved everyone who witnessed it. The powerful vampire king, gentle as silk with his mortal love, holding her hand through doctor visits, reading to her when her eyes grew tired, sitting beside her bed in the final weeks. On her last night, Elena woke to find Zarek watching her with ancient, sorrowful eyes. "I'm not afraid," she told him, voice barely a whisper. "I know." Zarek stroked her silver hair. "You have never been afraid of anything that mattered. Will you be all right?" "Eventually. Because you have given me something to protect, Elena. A legacy of change and hope and proof that connection matters more than power. I will guard that with everything I have." Elena smiled weakly. "Good. That's good." She paused, gathering strength. "I love you, Zarek Ravencrest. Loving you has been the greatest adventure of my life. And you, Elena Emory, have been the greatest gift of mine." Zarek kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "Thank you. For everything. For your laughter, your courage, your brilliant heart. For teaching me how to live again." "Keep laughing," Elena whispered. "Promise me again." "I promise," Zarek said, and she could hear tears in his voice. "I will laugh and remember you. Always." Elena closed her eyes, content. She died peacefully just before dawn, held in the arms of the vampire king who loved her, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived. Zarek kept his promise. He grieved deeply. The entire city mourned with him, remembering the seamstress who'd changed everything. But he did not retreat into coldness or distance. He continued the work they'd started together, expanding the councils, strengthening the peace accords, ensuring that Elena's vision of a world where worth was measured by character rather than circumstance became permanent reality. He kept the atelier running, though he never replaced Elena as its heart. Instead, he transformed part of it into a school, offering free training to young artisans regardless of their background. He called it the Elena Emory Academy of Arts, and it became one of the most prestigious institutions in the region. And he learned to laugh again, though it took time. He found joy in mentoring young leaders, in watching the society he and Elena had built continue to thrive, in preserving her memory through action rather than mere mourning. Years became decades. The world continued to change, but the foundation remained solid. The peace between mortals and vampires deepened into something unshakable. The councils spread to every corner of the known world, and always, always, people remembered the seamstress and the king, the woman who'd worn a dress made from damaged velvet, and the vampire who'd told her that her laughter was the finest thing anyone could wear. Zarek never took another partner. He ruled for 2 more centuries, always keeping Elena's silver ring in his pocket, always remembering the woman who'd taught him that love and joy and genuine connection mattered more than immortality or power or ancient bloodlines. And sometimes, late at night in the quiet of his study, he would hold that ring and whisper to the memory of the woman he'd loved. "I kept my promise, Elena. I'm still laughing, still protecting what we built, still honoring the gift you gave me." Because in the end, that was what their love story had always been about. Not forever, but fullness. Not immortality, but presence. Not perfection, but genuine connection between 2 people who'd found each other against impossible odds and chosen to build something beautiful together. The finest thing anyone could wear was never a dress or jewels or displays of wealth. It was the courage to be fully yourself, to love honestly, to fight for what mattered, and to laugh in the face of those who tried to diminish you. Elena Emory had worn that every day of her life, and because of her, the world was forever changed.